start the recording now. It's now recording. Okay, I'm going to share. All right, so you should be seeing the website, and then we're going to take a look at the calendar. And I just want to remind you that we have exam 1 next week. So if you look, we've completed 1, 2, 3, 4. This week, week 5, today is February 9th, we are going to cover, we're going to start jQuery, right? So finally, right, you're probably really excited about that. So we'll start looking at jQuery. And then I just want to remind you, a week from today, on February 16th, you will have your exam 1. So exam 1 will be obviously it's going to be on Brightspace. It's going to be, it's a exam on Brightspace, written exam. You can expect basically problems, and you'll have to implement the code. Okay, so obviously it'll cover everything that we've done so far in the semester, including what we're going to cover this week, which is a little bit of jQuery. So there could be some essay type questions, but for the most part, it'll just be, build a website for this. You have to do the JavaScript or basically those ideas. So the question, open book. So I can't see what you guys are doing on your end, obviously. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. Just make sure though that you study, because there's going to be a lot of problems there, and if you just start searching every problem, you're not going to finish the exam. So make sure you you take a look at that. So the plan is next Tuesday at this time, I'll log in at 4. We can stay online for the first 5 minutes just to kind of help everyone figure out where the exam is and everything, and any additional instructions I might give you. And then after that, I'll sign off, and you guys can sign off and just go and work on your exam on your own. It's kind of a take home in a sense. So as I said, it'll just be websites. You can build a website on your computer if you'd like, and then you have the advantage of copy pasting the test, the answer. Just make sure you write your own code, okay? Don't say, I Googled this and I found this and I just pasted it. I won't accept that. I'm looking for your own work. So it's okay not to be perfect. Also, it doesn't have to be running. I didn't say that, you have to give me running code. I'm usually, the advantage of a written exam is I'm looking just for like the logic, right? Pseudocode, that you understand the basic concept. So it is that type of exam. So I would strongly recommend you, just based on your own mind, your own understanding, write the code as you think it should be. If you miss if you have a little syntax error here and there, it doesn't matter, okay? But it'll be just a Word document, and then you need to provide your answers in there. Okay, so that's basically the idea. Okay, so if anyone needs extra time, what I usually do is, if you remember last semester, I kind of did the same thing. I set the exam from 4 to 6, but then after 6, if you submit, it'll mark it late. So I'll usually leave it, 1 more hour. That's usually some people require that. So it would run from 4 to 6 or 4 to 7 for those that have approved extra hour. But remember, it'll mark it late if you submit after 6. And if I don't have you in my list of extra time, that's not a good thing. Okay, so make sure you submit your exams at the appropriate time. All right, if you have any requests beyond extra time, which usually nobody does, just let me know, okay? Email me about it. Don't send me the system generated. Just say what additional thing you need, because I get a lot of emails and it's very difficult. So, but I think for the most part, that usually works. Like last semester, nobody had problems with that. So again, exam from 4 to 6, but it'll stay, as I usually do with homework, 1 hour open. It'll mark it late if submitted between 6 and 7, but that's only acceptable for students that have approved extra time. All right, so anything else, guys, about the exam? All clear, I assume?
I think it's pretty clear.
Okay, great. So as I said, you can see in the calendar, I already updated it. For that, I haven't updated, obviously, this week. I need to do that. But so that's the plan. And then, so jQuery, jQuery will take a while because it's jQuery UI. So we'll probably get to about March, maybe, and then in March we'll start PHP, and the rest of the semester will fly after spring break. So make sure, start already also thinking about your term project, finding team members, groups of 3. I'm being asked if jQuery will be on the test. Anything that we cover this week, yes. Obviously, the homework part of it, no, but anything that we cover, I'll do a lecture today. And so lecture, there will be also examples, code, as I usually do. Yeah, what we're doing this week will be on the exam, just today and Thursday. Okay. All right. So that's basically all the questions I'm seeing in the chat. All right. So the exam is cleared, and so now we can go ahead and move into into the class today. I finished grading some of your assignments. Please check your if I made any comments, and please make sure that you're doing that going forward, like putting default values on text boxes, things like that, because I have to run every single one of those programs, and I need you to have those values in there. Okay, so let's proceed and now share. Well, actually, I'm already sharing. So let's go to Brightspace. And I simply have some slides. I don't always have slides, but I have some slides here, as you can see. And so I'll start with that today, just to know the all right, so let's go ahead and open up this one, the JavaScript libraries. As you can see, that will be our lecture for today. So I'm going to put the save. Oh, that's not where I want. Open it. All right, so here we are, and you can follow along. Also, okay. All right, here we go. So this is, as I said, we're still kind of in client side. We've been leading up pretty much for 4 weeks to this topic, JavaScript libraries, right? Remember, we're still on the client side, so this is still things that are running on the client side. With JavaScript here. So, and really, the topic is jQuery. So jQuery, as I've mentioned several times, is very nice for creating all kinds of controls. You can create like an Excel spreadsheet on your website, right? So people, if you think about it, people in industry, they're not like you guys. They're not like very technically savvy, and they might know one tool, right? One program, and a lot of them know Excel. And so they feel really comfortable with Excel, and it kind of makes sense to even recreate that on a website, right? So they know very well how to. And so libraries like jQuery create this kind of thing. There's a lot of libraries out there. There's now even some libraries for, let's say, adding like AI to your websites, right? Like actual real models, you can add them with these libraries. So it's very, very interesting, very powerful. And hopefully you've seen, with JavaScript, we've been making dynamic websites, and now we're just going to continue to make them more dynamic. But by adding jQuery, we're also adding a few new capabilities. So for the fact, the fact that it kind of says like jQuery, and query we can think of as query is like a question or finding something, right? We do queries of things. So jQuery will actually allow us to grab things, manipulate them, changing them. So a lot of what we were doing with get element by ID, if you remember, right? So we've been using get element by ID. We're not going to use get element by ID anymore. That might be what's behind the scenes, right, in the DOM model, but it's not what we're going to be using here. Okay, so and that's the beauty of this, right? That we're introducing this new library. Obviously, I cannot cover all the libraries. Google has its own, a lot of these libraries that people just use that because they're just big, and so we'll just start with a very basic one, which is jQuery. And just keep in mind that a lot of libraries, additional libraries, are built on top of jQuery. So it's almost like you create a website, you import jQuery, and then you import, the other. And when I say import, we create a link, right? But you create the link for jQuery, and then you create the link for the other library. But that other library depends on jQuery itself. So it's more like personalized libraries, basically. Okay, so just checking the that it was recording. All right, so that's kind of the idea, right? So that's why the topic, this one's not technically called jQuery itself. It's actually JavaScript libraries. All right, so JavaScript libraries to kind of underscore the point that you can literally customize your own libraries, right? You can build your own. Some people make a living, believe it or not, some people just make a living out of making these libraries. You could specialize in building jQuery library, JavaScript jQuery libraries for, the energy industry, right? And you can just build, stuff that will go into the websites that they build for their own applications. You could specialize in AI and just build tools. That's actually something that it's kind of new. So somewhere where you could specialize and just build these very nice, interactive, very human, very ergonomic, if you will, very focused on human-computer interaction interfaces, right? These interfaces, and you can use these amazing libraries of JavaScript. So, we will start with very simple things like creating, a date picker, very fancy, the fancy buttons that you see, fancy different kinds of things. Okay, so a lot of this is still in MVC. In MVC, it's still we're still dealing with Vue, a lot of the Vue, which is just a presentation of the websites themselves, the appearance, but also some of the logic, obviously. And this library, this approach is very object oriented. Okay, so very object oriented. So keep that in mind as well. So first, I'll go over some of my lecture in the slides. Then I have a few notes. I'll use the whiteboard probably, and then after that, on Thursday, there will be no homework this week, given that I just want you to study for the exam, create your cheat sheets, etc., so that you're better organized for the test. Okay, so let's go ahead then and proceed. And if you have any questions at any time, just just stop me, and we'll talk about I can answer your questions. All right, so we'll talk about JavaScript libraries, frameworks. Obviously, I'll talk about jQuery and getting started. We'll talk about selectors, selecting an object, and then how we can traverse things, change styling, the manipulation effects, and events, of course. Which these websites are event driven, so that's still going to be a part of what we're doing. So JavaScript libraries, frameworks, they're basically packages developed for more productive, high-level JavaScript front-end development. So you can see there that the focus is not just on providing you with a whole bunch of new functions and tools, but it's also to make you more productive. And this is very true in jQuery. I always admire how you can basically do a lot of things in jQuery in several different ways, because it's intuitive in the sense that once you get a feel for it, you'll say like, I wonder if I just type this, will that work? You know, you get to that point where you're efficient because you already have a feel for it and the functions are there, you know, so it's very productive in that sense. So it allows you for interaction with DOM, you know, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And this one is very important. It's very cross-platform. It's very much designed for cross-platform or browser. And what that means is you've probably seen in your homework assignments with regular JavaScript, sometimes, especially in the past, but even today, you have to worry a lot about, you know, will it support this feature? Is this how you write it for this browser? You know, what if I use this other browser? Will it look kind of off, etc.? Now, jQuery, modern versions of jQuery will have multiple functions underneath, behind the scenes, that can check the browser. That's something that the code can do automatically. Okay, what browser am I in? And then after it knows the browser, okay, I'm going to use this part of the code, without you having to worry about it. You just made, you know, one statement. And the goal is, you know, as people work on jQuery and JavaScript libraries, is to make them more and more cross-platform capable. Okay, easy to use. Okay, so initially you might, although I've been trying all semester to keep anticipating how jQuery is going to work, initially you might have a little bit of an issue with it, you know, but eventually you will get a feel for how it works, and then you will realize it's actually pretty easy, very productive. It's extremely powerful, as you will see, not just in the elements that it gives you, but in a lot of the ways that you can code things. Sometimes in one line of code, you know, with chaining and everything, you would do a lot of things, a lot of little details. Okay, so that's pretty important. Okay, so pretty powerful, and of course free. So you can get it. You know, usually Google has some of the links that you can use. You can always check there. Just Google like latest version of JavaScript, and then you'll see that basically. You know, Google itself will have the code that you need to download. All right, so so that will be one of the things that we need to do, right? We need to find whatever the latest version is of JavaScript after the lecture, and then you'll see that there's usually a lot of versions, but you kind of need to look for the one appropriate, the appropriate one. All right, so you know, jQuery itself, you know, you can see the slogan there: write less, do more. Right. So again, focus is on efficiency. You know, jQuery has been around for a while, and you know, it's still pretty going strong. You know, so that's really great. jQuery is the most popular library, of course, developed and initiated by John Resig and others. Okay, so credit to them. It's free, open source. There's third-party support. There's people that will, you know, as I said, they can give you specialized versions. And you know, it's small size, right? So it's meant to be efficient so that it can run on the browser. The packages, we'll look at the core. That's really where we will start. And then we'll look at also jQuery UI when we want to focus more on the presentation of our website and our form. There's, you know, jQuery for mobile. I'm sure when you guys take your mobile phone development class, I'm sure that, you know, they'll teach you topics related to that. But in this class, remember, we are only focusing not on mobile, but just really on regular you know, websites, regular computers, basically. All right, so So getting started, you can, ways to get jQuery. As I said, there's various ways. You can go to download jQuery from this source, right? jQuery.com. Also, places that host jQuery, of course, Google, right? So you can look at them, Microsoft, and so on, right? So many places. We'll get to that once we start looking at the code. But basically, you want to get it from a good source, right? Like I would say Google probably is where I usually link it to, and that's really what it is. We don't have to install anything, right? We literally just you can download the jQuery file if you want and have it in your project, but usually for this class, we'll just have a link. It's very similar to how you do links with CSS style sheets, right? So when you do an external style sheet, you put in something like link at the top of the page, and that takes care of everything. Well, with jQuery is very much the same thing. We'll just have, the link for jQuery, and that will be it. All right, so there will be versioning issues. Okay, so we'll have to kind of work through that, figure out what's the latest, right? So we'll check it out, but nothing to worry about. It's good that you guys should develop the skill of, I don't have to tell you, you can just figure it out on your own. So we'll find it when we need to. And then there's formats, compressed, uncompressed, etc. Obviously, so that something can be a little bit faster when it downloads. Okay. All right. So, but basically, just a simple library. So the jQuery script has to be included in your HTML page. So I just kind of alluded to that. Really, you can see here, there's the trick, right? So we have a script tag, and then you can just specify. The important thing here to specify is the source, right? Very much like you do your own external jQuery code. Now you can specify the URL basically. So here jQuery is the URL of the jQuery file itself, and it's usually just one file, and we just have to get the URL for it. So we'll Google, best URL for jQuery. It'll probably take us to some Google thing. Right, so you don't have to declare anything. We really just add it to the HTML, and that's it. And then everything will be supported. Now that we've talked a little bit about that, we've talked about the mechanics of jQuery. And so now we can focus really on syntax, right? So that's really what you guys care about is, okay, how do I code this? All right, and this is a software development class, web, dynamic web applications, database driven. So we're gonna start thinking about jQuery. So again, jQuery is just for the presentation. Remember, it's not really for database management or anything like that. We are still just on the client side. And you'll see later on that usually the database part will be done on the server side in PHP. So now that we've arrived at the syntax, we can start discussing this. So, like I usually do, in this slides, I'll just provide keywords, keywords related to jQuery. And after the keywords, we will do examples, right? And that's really where it'll come through more clearly. So basically, it all revolves around initializing something. And you want to initialize something as a jQuery. So think of it as, in a sense, you can think of jQuery as an object, the jQuery object, like an object-oriented programming terms, right? So you have, I'm going to create my jQuery object, or I'm going to grab something and it becomes a jQuery. And then from there, I can use it. So you can see the intuition here. It usually works like this. This is, the idea. You're going to grab something within parentheses, right? You grab something, whatever it is, and you'll see there's a lot of things. You grab something within parentheses, and then you make it into a jQuery thing by either typing something like jQuery there, or you can just say $sign jQuery, right? So, you know, this is the idea basically, that you are going to plug something in here, you know, from your DOM. Usually it's something from the DOM, the document object model, and you grab that object, you make it into a jQuery, okay? All right, so that's the idea basically. And then as you can see, so we do jQuery, for instance, here in this example, you know, when we grab document, we're grabbing the entire DOM, as you know, right? You know, we've done examples last week of document.cookie and everything, document get element by ID. So in this case, we are, basically grabbing the whole document as a jQuery, and then we'll say something like dot, because it's an object, right? Because it's an object, we're going to say dot, and now we bring in some property about jQuery. So in this case, you know, we can say something like ready, right? And that just means it's initialized. So you grabbed it, and now you can process it. But you can see we can do the same with just a $sign here instead, right? And it's the same idea. Okay, so really then it translates into something like this, right? So it looks very strange, but the idea is for it to be simple, right? And that this makes it pretty simple. So for instance, instead of, so in the past, if you remember, you know, we had done, you know, things like, you know, we had the events associated with tags, like we had onload for the body tag, right? So onload or whatever, we had those events. Now, we have an equivalent way of doing that, where we write all the code in the JavaScript section, right? So it really just, it provides some more, you know, instead of having all these events and all the tags and everything, we can still use it, but we can now just kind of centralize it, I guess, into this idea. So doing document ready, you know, it's similar to onload, right? So they're both events that, you know, they trigger an event, and as you might imagine, then okay, I can specify something inside there, right? We use once again the concept of encapsulation, and we encapsulate something in here, and that can be, you know, something very simple, or it can be a lot of code, right? So it can be either one. But that's pretty much the general idea, and then after that, we just have to explore variations of this. You know, what are the methods here? What are all the things that we can do? But the central idea is to start with this. Okay. So what can jQuery do for you? Well, you know, create a very dynamic experience. That's really what I would say. Very dynamic. So it allows you to select elements, their CSS, attributes. It allows you to traverse the document tree, right? So it allows you to traverse DOM and all the nodes. It manipulates elements, right? Their attributes, creating, moving, copying, removing. As I said, you know, one of the key things that I do in that homework one is I make you type in all those text boxes, right? Imagine if you had to type all those text boxes every time. Here we're going to learn that we can actually create those text boxes completely dynamically, right? By creating some kind of a, you know, a website, creating a, you know, with a for loop, we can create the objects, link them together to the DOM model, etc. We can also handle events, right? So if we trigger events, we can handle them from the jQuery, and then we can also implement effects, and we'll play around with that as well. You know, some fun things we can do to create some effects, just to kind of illustrate to you guys, you know, what we can do. Obviously, here, you know, I'll cover only a fraction of everything that jQuery has, but it should be enough for you to be able to figure out the rest on your own. right? So we'll talk about this idea of selectors. You know, this is where the query, the search part of this comes in, right? The selector. So the basic use is that you're going to, you'll see me. I'll say, we need to grab this control, or we need to grab this tag, or we need to grab that div, you know, different elements in the website we're going to grab through the use of basically you will hear me refer to this as the jQuery function. Okay, and so you know you will grab the selector, right, where the selector could be, for instance, a tag, right? So an HTML element tag. So for instance, I do $div, and when I say that div, that could mean that I want to grab all the divs. So if that's the case, it'll return a list of all the divs, and then you can iterate through them. Or I could say a div with a specific name or an ID, and then it just grabs that one. So you can see that example actually here, right? So if I want an ID, I can say $, and then within the parentheses now, you know, $, and then the name, whatever it is, right? So I put in the name there, and now I can just grab by ID, very much like we did get element by ID, right? Then we can also do things like, you know, as you know, we can specify classes in CSS. Well, actually, instead of creating the CSS file, you know, or you know, we can dynamically change it here. So we can say, you know, $, and then in here, like you can see here, dot left align, right? So now we can grab that part of CSS so that we can make modifications to all elements that follow that class, for instance, right? We can do all kinds of things. We can select an input, right, with a specific name, like, you know, last name, etc. So we can, that's the beauty of this, is that jQuery is like a search engine kind of logic, right, that you just have to understand, you know, and you can grab a lot of tags. You could grab all the text boxes, all the buttons, all the inputs, or you can just grab certain ones, or you can just modify something about them, etc. It's about being clever, and you'll see that's why I'll show you a lot of examples of how this can be done, right? So you can see here, for instance, this one will grab from a table, the table data cells, right? And then we'll see later on how to use this first, last, etc. By index also in the table data, since they have index positions, and of course combinations of these, right? So that's part of it. So if you think about it, this part of jQuery, the selectors, just really refers to ways of grabbing tags or elements in your DOM beyond our well-known get element by ID. You know, something a little bit more sophisticated, and you know, we'll play with that. So the idea is something like this, right? So this is, for instance, you can see here, document get element by ID versus in jQuery, something like that. $, $ID, okay? And you can see it's the same ID, right? Same ID, just different ways of collecting our, you know, getting our data. So that's the first part. So once the jQuery function grabs the selector, it will return, basically, as I said before, what we can think of as a jQuery object. Okay. All right. So now jQuery offers several pseudo selectors that help you find elements in your form. Right, so we will see these later on. So for instance, we can use button, selects button elements and elements with type button, right? So we can say checkbox and then selects input with type checkbox. Checked, it selects checked inputs. Disabled selects disabled form elements. Enabled selects enabled for elements. You'll see the use of a colon. You've seen it already in one of the previous slides. That this allows you to specify more detail, right? So that, you know, you can say something like a tag and then colon and then a specifier, And that will allow you to give you more, you know, these pseudo selectors that help you to find elements in your form. Okay, so that's a important aspect of this. All right, so jQuery. So now here are a few more, you know, from form elements. Select inputs with type file, select images, select inputs like input text area, and so on. If you have a password input, right, radio buttons, and so on, right? So text boxes, etc. So here's an example, you know, again, the use of the jQuery function, $, and then in here you specify from my form, I want input, right? So get all elements that accept an input. So again, in these kinds of cases, the object is itself an array of objects, right? And then, of course, as you might imagine, you can iterate through them. And jQuery has, instead of us having to write for loops and things like that, you will see that it has also its built-in iterators and ways to iterate over an object, okay? Chaining is another very powerful concept, and it's basically when you do something like this. You have some object and then dot, and then something happens to it, like a transformation or a filtering, and then to that result you do C and then dot and then D and so on, right? And so basically you're just like filtering or processing the data more and more and more. And that's what chaining is called, is that you can just add these dots. The advantage of this is it allows you to create a lot of one-liner code, okay? So you end up with a lot of code that can just be one line, okay? One line. So you can see examples of this. Basically, the formal definition is that the methods can be called continuously on a selection, right? So for instance, here, you know, we use the jQuery function. We grab from the table data cells. We grab the last one, and then from that we grab the text, and we change it to last cell, right? We play with it. Or even more chaining, we grab a table data, or we grab all table datas here, right? So this will return a list of all the table datas, but then we say where it's equal to index 1, then we grab that one, and then that one gets changed. So that's what chaining basically means. It means, as I said, to think of it as grabbing an object and then filtering or transforming it, but being able to chain that into multiple actions without having to write multiple lines of code. And instead, the goal is to kind of do one-liner codes, which usually do make your code writing a lot more readable and simpler. All right, so let's continue. You can see that returns, this one, for instance, returns one element and then it returns the text of it, right? So it returns whatever text is in that table data cell, in particular, the last one. So notice the syntax here. You use colons for the pseudo selectors, and then the dot basically for chaining, and then you'll have methods have parentheses, and then you can start with the $, which is the jQuery function basically. All right. So refining and filtering. So these are other, as I said before, right? It's like you can think of it as filtering your tags basically. So because sometimes you want to make an update to your website that you either want to apply to just one tag or a group of tags, or to a specific style, etc. And that's what this is for. jQuery offers several methods for zeroing in on exactly what you want, right? So you want div.foo, you want that div, and then that has a paragraph tag. So in this case, div.foo elements, it gets elements that contain the paragraph tag, okay? Right here, you can select, from headings, right? Select all H1 headings, and then you can say, but I want only those that don't have the dot bar, okay? So in this case, it selects all H1 elements that don't have a class of bar. So you can see it starts to even provide some Boolean logic in there for you to find the appropriate terms, okay? Here, on the other hand, is, on an unordered list, you want all the LIs that have .current. So unordered list items with class of current. You see, you can do the search there. Here we have another one. ULLI, if you think about it, just that independently would give you the list of all list items in an unordered list, but then you just want the first one, right? So then you can say just the first unordered list item. Or you can do that by index here. You would say from an unordered list, I want, out of all the list items, I want the one that is equal to 5, okay? Which it starts at 6, so it would be the 6th item. So just watch out for that as you're writing your code. Are there any questions so far, guys?
No questions.
All right, so making sense. All right, so good. So as you can see, these are the main ideas that I'm introducing.
Your microphone sounds kind of funky.
Is it sounding robotic?
Yeah, you kind of sound like a robot.
Is that then going?
No, it just happened.
Just started. Okay, give me a second. Yeah, okay. So usually, if I do this, does it change?
It's still the same.
How about now?
Nope.
Yeah, it still sounds the same.
Okay, let me. How about like this?
That sounds a lot better.
Yeah, a lot better.
Sure. Okay. And if I do this, how about now?
Yep,
Yeah,
still
Sounds
sounds
good.
Still good? Okay. All right. So, okay, great. I don't actually know why that happens, but okay. So if it's back, finish up the slides. So let me do this. Okay, so we're back, I think, here. Yeah. So this is where we were. Now let's move on. So we were talking about just grabbing the elements, right? So you were just grabbing the elements. That's part of the jQuery, right? So I query, you can think of it as I'm gonna take this as a reminder. Oh yeah, I can query things, grabbing elements in a lot of ways. And that's why we will look at a lot of examples, really, to get a better feel for how this works. And then after that, now you have to think about, okay, what am I going to do? After we've talked about the selectors, right? What are we going to do? How are we going to process the data? And what do we want to do with it? So this is where you have several methods. So for instance, you have one, which is the CSS method, right? So, and as the name implies, pretty clear that what you're going to do is you're going to modify the style sheets, okay? You're going to modify the style sheet. So in this case, for instance, you can see that the idea is that you grab the heading 1 tags, right? And then you say, you know what, I want to grab the heading 1 tags and I'm going to modify with CSS, and I'm going to change the font size, right, to some value. So we'll later on see specifically how we can do it, but you know that's the idea. Okay, so in this case, for instance, this will just return the current value. And you can see here's an example of what I was saying where it's a little bit intuitive, right? So notice that you can call font size in a couple of different ways and it'll just work. That's what's great about, you know, it's like people that do a lot of web development, they said, well, can we make it so that it's a little bit more forgiving, and so they, it'll work with this approach, with that approach, and that's really why it makes productivity much better. Here we can see if we want to set an individual property, usually the idea is to provide name value pairs, right? So, just like we were talking about the other day, name value pairs or tuples, right? So here we have heading 1, we grab the heading 1s, and now we're going to say, oh, by the way, I want to change the CSS property of the font size to be 100 pixels, right? So setting that parameter, but you could also say, no, I want to do multiple properties of the CSS. So in that case, what we can do, again, we grab all the heading 1 tags, and then we modify the CSS. And just notice, you're going to provide in curly brackets, right, sort of a list of key values. And so in this case, we say, well, I want font size to be 100 pixels, and then comma, I want color to be red, okay? I want color to be red. So that's the idea in setting basically multiple properties. Okay. Other things that you can do, you have other, related to styling, is you can add a class, remove a class. So you have these as actually built-in methods. So you can say, for instance, notice here, create a variable, right? Notice the $sign there. And you create a variable that is going to be a jQuery variable. And, I grab the heading 1s, right? And then I'm going to basically add a class to it, just like we were writing it in the CSS, but you do this dynamically. And you provide some value there for it, what you're going to call it. So here's more examples of this. So for instance, the attribute. So we're all very familiar with the IMG tag, right? And then we have some kind of href, something, right? So this is how we would usually statically write in our information into the HTML document. Well, now for attributes, we can also use it just like for styling, right? So, so in this case, we can set multiple attributes at once or just one at a time. So here we grab the anchor tags, right? And then we're going to specify an attribute, which is the href, and then the website where we want to go. And so you can imagine how that can be changed dynamically. We could also grab the anchor tags, and again with the approach of sort of in curly brackets, we're going to plug in a list basically of key value pairs. So here you can see we've got title and the title, and then the href and some kind of a URL basically, okay? So that's really the idea. Okay, over here we have the opposite of that. If we just want to return whatever the href is, this returns the href for the first anchor element in the document, for instance. Okay, so usually when you do these things, you'll have to, kind of test it out, either use an alert or something to see what the output is, or just write it to a span or a div in your website. Okay. Now, we can also traverse. There are built-in methods for traversing the DOM tree, right? So one can traverse a document tree structure from a selection. So you can see here we have methods like next, the parent of, closest, the children, siblings, and the each. We have for each and so on for iterating. All right, for iterating. So similar to what the for loop would do, but just more efficiently. Because if you think about it, the jQuery object will give you a list, then you specify a method that says iterate through all of these, and then within that method, you can specify the code that you want to use for the specific task. Okay, so you can see here in our examples, we have a heading 1 tag, and then we can say things like next paragraph. We want the parent of this tag that we got there. Of all the divs, the ones that are visible, we can specify an input and then by name. And then, things like closest, children, siblings, etc. So a lot of these things, for now, don't worry about them. We'll see them when we do examples. Okay, but this just illustrates some of the tools that we're going to be trying out. All right, and then finally, things like changing, manipulation, right? So getting and setting information. So here we have HTML, get or set the HTML contents. Very much like what we were doing before with dot inner HTML, right? Similar idea. So I grab, my div, and from there, the paragraph, that's the first one. And that particular one now, that first paragraph, I want to change within the p tags, right? So it would be within these p tags. I want to get the change, basically, the code that goes in there. And you can see that the code can actually be words and also additional HTML tags, right? So there's no limit to that. And that will allow you to have more control over your website. Okay. So that basically you can change HTML, you can change text, attributes, values, etc. Right? So all the parameters that we're sort of familiar with that before we were dealing with statically on the HTML page, we can now more easily deal with them dynamically. Okay, so that's really the goal. All right, so here now doing much more complex things. Now, if you remember, we already did something like this. We already did something like this with JavaScript, right? When we did that drop-down example, right? So if you think about it, we did that drop-down where we added values to the drop-down dynamically, and now we're pretty much going to do the same, okay? So adding a new element to the page, so you can create a new element. What type of an element? It's a p tag, a paragraph, right? And then append to, and then what do we append it to, right? So something called content. And then we can say even more, insert after this particular thing. So this will remove the p from content and beyond, right? So we can do a lot of things. So this is getting too complex to describe like this. So we'll just see examples of this in the code. But you get the idea that we're manipulating things. as far as this is not a drop down, this is an unordered list, but it's a similar idea. If you notice, we grab the unordered list and now we can append the list item. Remember how much work it took to do that drop down in just pure JavaScript, and look at how smooth and clean that is. Okay, so that's really the idea. I think this a lot of, by now I think you guys probably get the idea of what this is, but this is what you can accomplish. So there's functions, moving elements like insert after, insert before, append to, append, prepend, and so on and so on. Okay, so as I said, a lot of these things are just easier to understand with an example. So just think about that for now. But it's basically rearranging things in a set of nodes, basically in the DOM tree. Okay. You can remove and make copies of elements as well. You can see that here. We have the clone element, so you can grab an element, copy it, and then append it to something else. So copy the first item to the end of the list as well. Okay. Now, some of this, so this part here, the core utility methods in the JavaScript, basically we have a few functions like trimming, okay, and we have this one, the each. Now this one is actually really important. We will look at this in the code examples, but it's basically the idea of a for loop, right? So you can see here it iterates through arrays or objects, right? So it's a way that we can, it's like we can attack something with this each. You can see here we have a list of elements, right? And the for each then allows you to grab the elements this way. And then notice there's a comma, and then in the comma, there's a function, right? And the function basically handles each element. So as we iterate, we have foo, we have the index and the value for foo. Next iteration, we'll have the index and the value for bar, and so on, right? But again, these kinds of things will be easier to visualize in the code itself. But just be aware, this is an important one that we will take a look at. And then here, there's a lot of methods, so I'm not going to mention all of them. But, like in array, right? See if you can find something. And then this we'll skip for now. We'll skip this as well. Oh, now this is important. And again, we'll see this in the examples. I don't want to spend too much. I want to move on to the code instead of spending too much time here. But just I want to point out this syntax we will see, connecting events. So this is a really nice one actually, where you can basically link an event to a function, right? Given a tag. So there's like 3 things involved, right? So you're going to, it's called bind, right? So you're going to bind the same handler to multiple events. So you can see here, we grab the p tag, right? Or all the p tags, and we're going to bind them to a clicking event. And then when you do something, when somebody clicks, then this is going to be the function that handles that click. So again, it's a name, it's still going to be name value pairs where the name is the event and the value is the function itself, right? And notice these are anonymous functions. They don't have a name because they're already, you kind of know what they are tied to. But this could be a lot of code, as we will see later. We can, of course, unbind, and that's just unlinking things as well, so that the effect no longer applies as we start using the website. But this will be pretty important. Bind, there will be other events like click as well, so we can just literally say bind or click. And the idea is that whereas before this p tag, you click on it, nothing happens. After you do this, you click on it and then it works, and something, whatever you define in this section here of code is what's going to take place, basically. All right. Right, so this, same idea. And then these are just some special effects. This will be kind of one of the last things we cover in this series of jQuery. And, we'll just see things like fade in, fade out. It's really fun how to create a control that kind of slowly fades in, fades out. Obviously you want to show and hide, slide down, slide up, and so on. And effect usually affects, because they're little animations, they'll have a default value of time, how long it takes. And it's usually just in terms of what looks good for your application. Right, so basically this gets into like animation. And so that's really, so that's good. That's basically the introduction to jQuery. This, of course, introduces the kind of a lot of the syntax, the basic ideas, the terminology, and so on. All right, so now that we have done the slides, we can go ahead then and switch over to Notepad++. And now in Notepad, what we're going to do is we're going to just start writing some code, try it out, and get a feel for jQuery. So let me I'm going to do the exact same thing I did before. Right? I'm going to and as I said, there's no need to look at the homework for jQuery yet, since I'm not assigning it. So this week we'll just do examples. I'll do examples today and Thursday. All right, so so I need to create a file. So go ahead and create your file where, in your folder, right? So go to your 362 folder on your desktop, create a new folder, I would say, in there called jQuery. Okay, and within that, create a text file. Call it, example 1, I guess. Example 1. .htm, right? So remember, it's still just a basic HTML page. Right, and then go ahead and open that in Notepad++. So I'm going to share the Notepad. Right, so you should now be seeing the Notepad here. Right, so we can, the usual thing, we can create the structure, HTML. So HTML. And then we can add the head section, body section. Okay, as usual. And then now the key thing is we're going to go into the head section here. And, just like you would usually set up like the title, any links that you have to CSS, now here we're going to add script, right? And then we can say source. And then this is where we have to find some source over the web. So I have HTTP code.jQuery.com. Right, and then from there, jQuery, let's say min, that's going to be .min for the minimum version .js. What I recommend for you guys is spend, since you don't have any homework, spend some time tonight or tomorrow just looking at this website, maybe Google what's the best jQuery source, and play around with all of those, right? Play around, see which ones work for you, which ones don't, but hopefully this will work just fine. So then, close the tags, right, script, and there you have it. So at this point, that's basically the main idea, that you introduce jQuery like that. Then after that, you can do script here. You could also have an external script, JavaScript file, but I'm just for convenience doing this here. All right, and so the idea now is that this is where we can call our jQuery, right? So I can do things like, let's start to initialize jQuery. So we're going to try to do that, initialize our jQuery. Okay. In the body section, all we will need really is a span. For now, let's just type in some div. So span ID, and then message 1, and then span. I'll add a break line. Just like that. Okay, so now the first thing is, we're just going to try this. As I said, there's a lot of ways to get things to work in jQuery because it's very versatile. So let's just start playing with, let's say like, first try or method 1, something like that. So let's start with the main idea of the code. And I'm going to say J. Notice the Q is uppercase, right? jQuery. Right, so it auto-completes there. And then, right now I'm just going to grab the whole document. Let's just start with that. Grab document. And then now I'm going to say ready. So that's the ready function. So notice I do that. Okay, but now I want to say something that I want to do, right? I want to do something. Like I want to write a message to message 1, the span message 1, right? So what I need to do is I need to write the code here, right inside there, remember. And so what you do here is really you can specify an anonymous function. So as we talked about them, so you do function, so that now has parentheses, open curly bracket, close curly bracket, right? So that's the structure of a function. But to make this, I guess, more readable, we do something like this. If you notice now, we can write our code here. And so this is why before, when we were using the curly brackets, I was always doing a curly bracket open here, and then another one close here. Because when you write the code like this, it's easy to trace everything. So there's a parentheses here, and then here's the closing parentheses, and then there's a curly bracket here, and then here's the closing curly bracket. So now you can write whatever code you want, however many lines of code you want in here, right? So in this case, now I'm going to, again, grab jQuery object, right? Because here I grab the document like on onload event. Now I want to grab the span. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab message 1. There it is. So I autocomplete. So now I've grabbed message 1, and I'm going to try to see if I can't change the text of it. So I'm going to say text. Right, you can see that there. And now I'm going to say within here, I'm going to say hello world. Oops, hello world of jQuery. Let's see. All right, so we say hello world of jQuery. All right, and that is the basic idea. All right, so that's our our first jQuery type of approach. So let's go ahead and try to run this on your computer and see what happens. All right, I'm going to share my output. And you can see there, hopefully you're seeing that it says hello world of jQuery. And that's it. That's the, the basic mechanism that we will be using from now on. Right? We're going to, as you can see, it's still a website, HTML, CSS, and so on. It's still JavaScript, but it's just now this new repackaged version of JavaScript called jQuery that allows us, as I said, to select tags in fancy ways, if you will, more complex ways, and then also perform many tasks with them. Are there any questions on this, guys?
No questions.
Not at the moment, at least.
Making sense? That's good. Okay. So that's really it. I mean, there's nothing else in terms of like the idea, right? The big idea. That's it. If you understand, if you should be seeing the notepad, the code. So if this makes sense to you, right? It's really just about understanding this, keeping track of the brackets, making sure that you use these anonymous functions correctly, and then after that, it's pretty easy. It's just a lot. There's definitely a lot. I mean, jQuery is a huge thing with lots and huge things, where, like I said, there's a lot of ways to do the same thing. So, which is really actually pretty good for your productivity. Okay, so that's one way of doing this. Let's try, just as I said, because there's so many alternatives, let's try out a few other things. Instead, usually you'll just see me write like this. And as I said, I'll usually just refer to that as the jQuery function. Again, you can grab, the document, right, as I'm doing now. So I'm grabbing the document, then ready, of course, ready. Same thing. So once, I usually like to do this, I always open and close parentheses, make sure I don't miss anything. Then, of course, same idea. I'm going to put in a function in there of what I want to do. And open the curly bracket. There we go. And then now I open the space for writing my code. So once again, I have that. So here I want to, let's say I want to have another one. I'm going to have another message here. Sorry, another span. I'm just going to copy and paste this one. Obviously, we're going to call it message 2. And then in here now, I'm going to grab message 2. So I'm going to say the jQuery function, and I'm going to grab message 2. Okay, so I'm going to say, oops, sorry. I'm going to do, # message 2. So now I have it, and now I'm going to use the chaining property to be able to do something. So in this case, just change the text. Text will be, and then we can just specify some text, you know, hello, just hello, right? And so now we can try both of these. So if I save the file and refresh the page, and I share it with you, you can see there now I have hello world of jQuery, and then I have a second hello. Pretty easy. Pretty much the same thing. Okay, let's try it one more time. So I'm going to do control copy. You usually will do it. You know, this is another way that that you might use a lot. I mean, some of the time, this just depends on your own style, right? So you guys, you will start to develop your own style depending on what you prefer. But another thing you could do is just do, let's start actually clean. All right, so I'm going to do that. Okay, and that's my function. And then now all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a anonymous function directly. So function there, then open curly bracket, close curly bracket. Okay, so now you have, you're ready, basically. Did I miss something? No, I think I'm good. So and that's why this helps, right? See, now I think it's easier to see, okay, here's an open parentheses, closing curly bracket, opening, these two are fine. So there we go. So it looks correct to me. I've got my function there, and now I can maybe even combine them. So I can do jQuery here, and I'm going to grab, in this case, I'm going to want a third message. So I'm going to create a new span, message 3. Right, so that means I'm going to go down here and control copy. And it's going to be message 3, right? So dot, so message 3, and once again text like that, and you know, you can say something like it is cold, something like that, right? So now you have the third way of doing things. So we can save it, and now we can refresh. Go to your page, refresh it, and you can see that there. Your code is right there. Okay. Certainly look up, as I said, the Google. You know, go to Google. You know, do a little bit of this research on jQuery. Depending on your browser, there's a few things you have to consider. Your internet connection, right? Is it going to be pretty fast or slow? So certainly go do a little bit of research on, because there's a lot of options out there for the jQuery files that you're going to end up importing in the end. Okay. All right, so that pretty much concludes our first basic example of using jQuery. Okay, I'm gonna switch back. So this, you know, this at least should give you enough content, or enough information, I should say, for you guys to understand jQuery now. So I think I would say, in my opinion, at this point, if somebody asks, you know, what is jQuery, you know, you have a sense of it. Obviously, what remains, so your understanding, I think, should be clear. And now, obviously, what remains is just, okay, so what can I do with this idea now? And so for the next few weeks, actually, several weeks, pretty much until the middle of the semester, we will be just doing examples. So, so the next example, for instance, will be to create a, we're gonna create a select box. So a drop down, basically. So something similar to what we did before. Yeah, something similar to what we did before in the semester. Yeah, when we did the drop down example in pure raw JavaScript, now we're going to look at this example of a drop down, but let's call it a jQuery drop down. So what we're gonna do here, usually, I'm just going to create a new text file. Okay, so go ahead, create a new text file in your folder. Make sure you name these. I would recommend. Call this one jQuery dropdown or something like that. .htm. Right, and then just go ahead and open it in Notepad++. So I've already opened it. You can see it there. I'm just going to go and copy pretty much everything from the previous example. Just copy everything. Copy. And then now paste it in here, right? Just like, what we did. So that way you have a lot of the things. Now, usually what I like to do is I just clear it so I can start fresh, but only with this, and then, leave the message boxes in there. They're always useful, but obviously this one will have a few more things. So this will probably be the last example we do today, because it's a little bit, it's not too long. It's just there's a few moving pieces there that we have to consider. So we're trying to create a drop down. So that's usually, now we could build this drop down from like literally scratch. We could just start with a span and just build it, right? However, for this example, we're going to start with a drop down that's already there. It's just not populated. Okay, so the drop down is not populated. And so imagine the scenario where we would need some data from a database. So later on when we do server side, we would run the PHP code, grab the data from the database, combine that with JavaScript jQuery code, generate the final file that gets sent to the browser, and then in the browser everything can be shown. All right, so in this case, let's this is going to be a drop down. So maybe not a bad idea to give it a title here. So title jQuery drop down. Okay, title. All right. Okay, so what do we need? We will need, leave the spans at the bottom if we need to print something, but let's start at the top here. Let's say I need, let's start with a text. There's a question.
No, I was just saying you need to grab some input to populate your dropdown.
Yeah, thank you. Right, exactly. So we need some content, right? Just like we did before, I need a text box. So input, and let's say type, and this is going to be what? Text, right? And let's give it an ID, of course, so that we can find it And the ID will be something like item text. Okay, and then that's our input basically. And then the other thing that we might need here is we might need a select, right? If you remember, that's the name of the tag, select tag. All right, so we have the tag there, select. We should give it a name probably. And so the ID will be item list. Item list. And we can have at least one option in here for now. It's kind of a placeholder, really. Just a bit of a placeholder. All right, and then the last thing is, we're not going to make this fully jQuery yet. We're still going to be using some of the old elements for now, although all of this can be done in jQuery, but let's just make this a traditional like button or something. So input type equal button value, something like add things, let's add something, and then the event, on click. As I said, we could have used the bind, we could have used all that we just saw in the slides, but let's keep it simple for now. So then on click, and we're going to create a function here, add. We've got the add item function. All right, and now based on this, we can proceed to write the JavaScript code. So this should be enough. We probably need some break lines in here, I would say, just so that presentation-wise doesn't look so terrible. Here too. And probably here. Okay. So, oops. Right. So let's take a look at it first. Let's just see what it looks like. Make sure everything is correct. I'm going to open this up in the browser. All right, and it should look to you guys kind of like this. Right, you can see there, there's the option, but there's nothing there, nothing in the option. We're going to have the add button, so maybe we're going to say here like hammer, right, and hit add, and then the drop down should get a value. That's really our objective. Okay, our objective. So let's go ahead and switch back to the notepad. Hit switch back to the notepad, and now in here we can just specify the code that would do this. So at this point, I think you guys would probably already know how to do this intuitively, because that's the beauty of jQuery, right? It's very intuitive. Remember, you can use let, etc. I'm just using var, so I'm going to do here item text. And I'm going to create an object, a jQuery object that's going to be, so I called it jQuery function, and I'm going to grab item text. What is item text? Remember, item text is the text box. So this allows me to grab item text like that, and but this just gives me the object of it, so I need the value, right? The value, so val. Okay, and now I have get the text box value. So if there's hammer in there, Now I can basically grab that. Now let's say I'm gonna create an option, right? So I'm gonna create another object. I'm gonna call it option. Remember, this is going to be an actual jQuery object as opposed to a value that I got. So here I got a value from a jQuery object. Here I'm creating a jQuery object. So notice the $sign. Because I'm going to create an option object. And so what I do here is I can just easily, notice how handy this is. I can just use the way that I would do it statically in the HTML. I can just do it here. See that? So see how like intuitive it is. So this allows me to create a new option element through jQuery so that I can just append this as an actual object. And then now I can say to this option object dot text, right? And I'm going to plug in the text that I already have, which is, in this case, what is in item text. Obviously, I could have done all of this in one line. That's also possible. I'm just kind of simplifying it here, so it's a little bit more obvious code-wise. So this sets the options text, and then all that remains now is to link the list to this option. So literally like adding this option to the list. So in that case, again, I grab the jQuery function. Now I need to grab the select item list, right? And that's what I need to do. So that's going to be item list. And then now I have a built-in append method. So append method over there, and then I need to append this one, right, to the object. So I'm going to do append option. And that's it, right? So that's the basic idea. And so we can try this out basically, see if it works, see if there's any errors. Let's go ahead, save it. And now I'm going to share the screen.
Excuse me.
Oh yeah, sorry.
In the code, so you have it set to on-click add items, but none of that stuff that was typed is actually put into a function.
Oh, I didn't, right? I don't have a function add item. Very good catch. So thank you. Yes, you're right. So I needed to create function add item. Right, there we go. Open curly bracket. A really good eye there, and closing curly bracket. All right, so hopefully this will work. So try it out on your end. So you can open the browser, and I'm going to need to refresh. So you guys should be seeing my browser now. Go ahead and refresh. And now I'm going to add hammer. Okay, so that's a good sign there. Right, hammer is there. I'm going to say glue, add, and then hammer and glue are there. I'm going to say, nails, add, and so on. Right, so you can keep doing this. Drill, and so on. And that's it. That's, pretty much that same example we had done before, but this time around with jQuery. Yeah, jQuery, the core jQuery. Are there any questions?
Not at the moment.
No, that's great. So it seems like everyone is getting it. All right, so this is the next example is it's a fairly long one, so it'll take us. We don't have, so this is a good stopping point for today. I'll stay for a few minutes if you guys have any questions. Okay, somebody asked me to see the code. Let me move back. So there's the code again. You can take a look at it. So yeah, so remember that this is being recorded. So I will post a video later tonight. So you guys can take a look at this. All right, so remember, study this. So now, in my view, you understand the basic concept of jQuery. And then all that remains is obviously we're going to work through a lot of examples for a few weeks. Yeah, and so that's basically it. Remember, the exam is on Tuesday, so start studying for it. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording now.